Okay, here we go. Hello, this is Dennis McCarthy. And if you like this Substack, please do subscribe. Again, this is the only Substack, the only podcast, the only place on the internet that promises to reveal groundbreaking discoveries of historical significance and delivers. Last podcast, I said that we would be releasing in a week or so a brand new Shakespearean poem discovered, the first such poem discovered in centuries, first new Shakespearean poem, and yes, it was written by Thomas North. I'd also like to thank Julia Cleave at Who Wrote Shakespeare, the Who Wrote Shakespeare Substack, for her generous and kind review of the Thomas North theory. Very informative, and she also reviewed June Schluter's and my article in the Times Literary Supplement of December 2023 titled Murder Will Speak, the author of the first Hamlet and the real-life assassination of the Duke of Urbino. In the article, Julia does mention a rebuttal by Ross Barber, who is a serious and brilliant scholar. I love Ross. She's got a great Substack, which I will link to in this in my Substack post on this. But in Ross's rebuttal, I believe she had made a few mistakes. My rebuttal follows. I had produced it a couple of years ago. And once again, thank you for subscribing. Ross Barber just presented a critical review of the Thomas North theory that he wrote the original plays that Shakespeare later adapted for the stage. And she presented at the Shakespeare Authorship Trust. We were not asked, unfortunately, to give a presentation. Neither Michael Blanding, author of North of Shakespeare, or my co-author June Schluter, or I were asked to give a presentation or even a rebuttal there, which is unfortunate for an authorship organization, considering all the press that we've gotten. But Ross Barber's review, though negative, it was intelligent. She's a careful scholar, and it was very intelligent. It was fair. And so that's why I'm responding to it here. Let's get right into it. Perhaps Barber's most significant claim is that the passages from North's travel journal that June Schluter and I contend were used for Shakespeare's Henry VIII were not really used at all, and that the resemblances were really coincidental. We also contend in our book that the journal was used for The Winter's Tale, but this video focuses on the example from Henry VIII that Barber specifically reviewed. For example, in his entries for June 10th and 12th, North described a pair of striking events. One, the Pope sitting in his consistory. North even detailed the seating arrangements. And two, very detailed row-by-row depiction of a procession of cardinals, complete with the ceremonial objects being carried before them. These remarkable visions are rarely witnessed by anyone other than people who happen to be in Rome and have a front-row seat to the ceremonies for a newly elected pope, as did Thomas North. In fact, the scenes are so rare that it appears no other known work in history also juxtaposes a detailed description of a cardinal procession with the seating arrangements of a consistory, except for Shakespeare's Henry VIII. This is a just believe your eyes moment. The passages are clearly related. Just notice the phrases introducing each row of marchers: after them, next them with, then, after them. Consider the first section. The two vergers with silver wands corresponds to the two officers with silver rods. A mitre is a bishop's hat, which links to the cardinal's hat. Note, carrying each of them and bearing each both have follows or followed. Finally, then introduces the cross being borne before cardinals. Here's the next section. After the crosses comes the pillars. Although North uses borne before himself while the playwright uses bearing, in an earlier stage direction, the playwright even writes cardinal borne before him. Finally, both works also describe a consistory with the lords in the court. Both focus on the seating arrangements with the pope or king in a high chair in the center and the cardinals and bishops underneath them and on the side. Of course, no one else has similarly juxtaposed a description of a consistory with the court and the lords, along with cardinals with pillars. In fact, just these introductory phrases represent North's unique verbal fingerprint. Just this. You can forget everything else about cardinals, pillars, consistories, etc. No one else has ever written something like this. You can check this now yourself on Google by typing in after them, in quotes, around 30, next them with, in quotes. This searches for every webpage, book, blog, article, etc., everything on the internet which has after them within 30 words of next them with. As you will see, and as shown here, every result is quoting either Henry VIII or North's Journal. And you can search Google Books too. That's trillions of web pages, 40 million Google Books, no other results. While there are thousands of lines and passages of Thomas North's that have been recycled in the Shakespeare canon, this one's particularly difficult to explain because, well, it's from Thomas North's handwritten journal and it's about his experiences in Italy. Also, as June Schluter and I show in this book, Thomas North's 1555 travel journal, there's two more passages in Henry VIII that also derive from Thomas North's entries in his travel journal and his experiences in Italy. It should be quite clear that these connections between the consistory cardinal parade passages cannot be coincidental. In fact, there are people who vehemently oppose the Thomas North theory, still accept that Thomas North's journal was indeed used for Henry VIII, and they think that Shakespeare somehow got a hold of it. We'll explain later why that can't be true, but the point is, this is a really difficult one to dispute, so you have to give Ross Barber some credit. She's not ducking any of the difficult ones. Anyway, forensic linguistics, which is the foundation of source study, it's a science. And the question of the probability of whether some verbal resemblances or literary resemblances occurred by chance is an objective mathematical one. It is not a matter of opinion or desires, and this is an equation that cannot be talked away. Frequently, when someone is trying to believe that some series of events is much more probable than he wants to believe, say when Uncle Fred talks about playing the lottery, they often focus on just one event at a time. They are ignoring the general multiplication rule, ignoring that the fractions multiply with each event. So Uncle Fred will see the winning lottery ticket and say, oh, well, Mary's birthday is the 17th, or Tom is 47, and how hard is it to get 7? But of course, that's just looking at them one at a time. The trick is you have to get all of the numbers together on the same lottery ticket on the right draw. So with Powerball, you have to hit 5 numbers between 1 and 69 for the white Powerballs. And they can be in any order. So for the first Powerball, you've got 5 and 69 chances to hit it. For the second Powerball, you've got one fewer number, that's 4 in 68, then 3 in 67, 2 in 66, 1 in 65, and the red Powerball, you have to hit it in 1 in 26. You multiply all that together, that's 1 in 292.2 million. The question always is, what is the probability of matching all the elements together? And that same rationale holds for trying to match anything in a series, including verbal parallels in the same context. And everyone already knows how unlikely such parallels are when they are already familiar with the passage. For example, if you were to find a 17th century text with this passage, you would know this derives from the first few lines of Hamlet's famous soliloquy. This couldn't be a coincidence. And this is true even though the individual elements taken separately are not unique. Of course, the verb to be is common. And as shown here on Early English Books Online, or EBO, many works, including the Bible, has slings preceding within 10 words, arrows. But of course the question is, what are the chances of hitting all the lottery balls? What are the odds of bringing all the elements together in a discussion on death and suicide? Yes, slings before arrows occurs 88 times, but that is out of 1 billion words, or once out of every 11.36 million words. And you have to hit that right after to be and not to be. And even when you search EBO for those elements within 100 words, then you only get 2 results, 2 different editions of Hamlet. With this in mind, let us now look at Barber's challenge to the source passage in North's journal.
In the smoking gun section, McCarthy says that Shakespeare borrowed material from North's unpublished journal and begins with stage directions in Henry VIII, The Procession of Cardinals, which is why I mentioned it earlier.
Quick clarification. The passages do not just match on the cardinal procession, but on the consistory as well. What's more, both passages describe the very specific seating arrangements of the consistory. And this juxtaposition in the play is ahistorical. You have to match all the elements.
Which is why I mentioned it earlier. Yes, so there is this semantic field. There are necessary words being used with cardinals, etc. But McCarthy's very focused on the combination of after them and next them with.
Well, here she has now just rather quickly explained away the cardinal procession too, dismissing the entire description as part of the same semantic field. In other words, since two cardinals attended Catherine's trial, we should not be surprised that Shakespeare invented an elaborate procession for them, with other marchers holding silver rods or wands, and going 2 by 2, and having pillars and crosses borne before them by other gentlemen. And while it is true that a mixture of cardinals, pillars, and crosses is not unheard of, when you search Ebo for that, and born before, and any proximal reference to a consistory, you only get Shakespeare's Henry VIII. North's journal would also appear, but of course it hadn't been published, and so was not in the database.
But McCarthy's very focused on the combination of after them and next them with in these two lists. Next them on its own, in fact, also after them, there's plenty of matches on Ebo. So it's the combination of after them and next them with. He says that after them within 30 characters of next them with only occurs in North's journal and in Henry VIII when searched on Google. But the texts digitized and searchable by Google are severely limited. And what you see here are not 16th century texts, but modern ones. And obviously, lots of that is not going to be available to Google, places where you might find those things.
Barber here is going by my video. In our book, we do note we checked Google, Google Books, and early English books online. And that combo of phrases appears nowhere else. Here's the Ebo search. Also, Google Books does have 40 million books, including books that go back to the 16th and 17th centuries. And there's trillions of web pages on Google, and no one has even juxtaposed them accidentally. And I should stress that this is just the first two of an identical series of adverbial phrases introducing similar row-by-row descriptions of a cardinal parade. After them, next them with, then, after them.
Places where you might find those things. And I have to ask, really, how significant is that with? Because Herodotus, which it's very likely both North and Shakespeare read or could have read, had a lovely list of next thems and after thems. Seemingly, this came from Latin. So not unique then, possibly a common source, and the rest of the words are what I would call words necessary to describing a procession of cardinals.
So Barber couldn't find any works combining after them and next them with, and has to settle for just next them. On top of that, she finds it in the context of a Greek war. But the significance is that both North and Shakespeare use it in a cardinal parade. Consider another quick example. You read a 17th century spoof that has this minor character say, "Hey everyone, lend me your ears." And it turns out that this character's name is Mark Antony. Is it remotely likely that this occurred by chance? Of course not. Yes, it is true, lend me your ears occurs 37 other times on Ebo, even before Shakespeare. But the question, of course, is not whether anyone else has ever written lend me your ears in any context, but what are the odds that someone would have Mark Antony say it? Likewise, the question is not whether anyone almost wrote after them and next them with, but what are the odds someone would use them to describe a cardinal procession? It's the juxtaposition of Mark Antony or a cardinal procession that is relevant. The question is always, what are the odds all the elements occurred together? And it's not just these two lottery balls. All of these elements appear together in the related passages in both North and Shakespeare. Barber just focused on one of these lottery balls, searching for it in any context, and couldn't even find that. The after them, next them with match is not like hitting a number between 1 and 69, or even 1 in a million, or even 1 in a billion, but once in the searchable history of the English language. And that's just one matching lottery ball. What is more, other entries in North's journal inspired still other scenes in Henry VIII, like North's grand international banquet with the Duchess of Urbino and her beautiful waiting women, in which North describes trumpets and drums and shot discharged to welcome the foreign ambassadors, and the prince and noble host who received him honorably. And while those who could speak French conversed with this heavenly angelical troop of ladies who graced them with their presence, the others who could not merely watched as spectatores formarum, or admirers of beauty. Music then began to play, and the prince entreated North and the other gentlemen to take a lady out to dance. The music ended, and the banquet began. All of that, down to the peculiar details and language, is in the international banquet scene in Henry VIII. even in that very same order. Again, in Henry VIII, the playwright bizarrely turns the women spectators of Anne's procession into the masked and costumed women of an Italian carnival. Why? Because North was awed by the masked and costumed women of Austy's carnival, and they also were indeed spectators of a procession. North's journal is necessarily linked to these scenes in Henry VIII. But is it possible that Shakespeare got a hold of this diary and then tried to reproduce North's experiences? No, we have proof that this can't be the case. Before North compiled his writings into the extant journal, he used 3 history books to help him add information to his entries. These are the citations for some of the passages that North used in the diary, and these are also the exact same source passages used in Henry VIII. And this last part is well known. Scholars and editors have long recognized these passages as the original inspiration for various scenes in the history play. It is just that no one ever knew that North had first used these passages for his journal. Here is Ross Barber's response to that last point.
McCarthy, in fact, notes that North relied on 2 other texts to add what he calls knowing details to his journal entries, and I see no reason why they couldn't have been used by Shakespeare for exactly the same purpose.
But the question is, what are the chances that Shakespeare would borrow from precisely the same passages that North did? Only 2 works in history focus on these very specific historical passages, North's journal and Henry VIII. Ross Barber also disputes North's links relating the following passage in Othello. In Othello, Iago's speech that a thief of material goods does less harm than he that robs me of my good name derives from a similar passage in Thomas North's Dial of Princes, first published in 1557, 7 years before Shakespeare was born. It is the same distinctive point in the same language, and it cannot be dismissed as coincidence as Iago nearly quotes North's Dial, but he that robs me of my good name. And when we search early English books online, or Google Books, for all works ever written that use this particular language, we only find North's Dial and Othello, or works quoting them. Here now is Ross Barber's critique.
But he didn't need to, because there is an earlier source, I found it in a text by Erasmus, published in 1534. And as for the pairing of rich and poor, well, that's a standard rhetorical pairing.
In other words, maybe Shakespeare got the wording from Erasmus and not North. But as we see here, Erasmus's line isn't really that close, and it is wildly improbable that Shakespeare, just by chance, took Erasmus's line and transformed it into North's. Both North and Shakespeare share an astonishing 9 out of 12 words and 3 trigrams, but he that robs me of my good name. How many other people have juxtaposed but he that and my good name? 0. What is more, Erasmus's work doesn't share the context. Both North and Shakespeare make the point that the thief of material goods do little harm because material wealth is temporal. Both use who steals my and the rich poor antithesis. Finally, Erasmus's line is not a coincidence either. Both Erasmus and Guevara, the man who North was translating, were continental humanists of the early 16th century and repeated many similar ideas. But Shakespeare's wording obviously comes from North, not Erasmus. Ross Barber also challenged a few other parallel passages, but they all fail for the same reason. You have to determine the probability of all elements occurring together. The fact remains Shakespeare borrowed thousands of lines and passages from everything North ever wrote, including his unpublished material. No one has borrowed more from an earlier writer, and it is not even close. But this was not a hostile critique, and Barber elsewhere agrees on the significance of some of the evidence. This includes the fact that North appears to have been paid for a Lesterman's play, and that there appears to be a connection between North's handwritten marginalia and a few Shakespeare plays.